What's up YouTube, Saf here on SuperSaf TV and welcome to another SuperSaf style camera comparison, this time between the OnePlus 6 and the iPhone 10. So in the usual style, we'll be looking at both the front and rear-facing cameras, images as well as video too. Do also look out for the audio icon in the corner of the screen, and that will indicate to you which device the audio is coming from, and I'll be switching between these two throughout this video to give you guys a better idea of the differences in audio as well. So we're currently using the front-facing cameras. We've got some great light outdoors and we're just going to be testing out the stabilization, so I'm just going ahead and walking, and now let's go ahead and run. Now we've switched over to the rear-facing cameras. We're filming at 4K 30 frames a second. With the iPhone 10 we do have optical zoom. On the OnePlus 6 it is digital zoom. So that's what we've got here. Now let's go ahead and test out the stabilization. It's 4K 30 frames a second, so just a bit of a walk initially, and now let's run. Now just testing out the autofocus on the OnePlus 6. Seems to be doing a decent job. My previous test, it was struggling with the flowers in the background, but maybe because this is not as complicated, seems to be doing okay. Same autofocus test on the iPhone 10. Also seems to be doing absolutely fine. So that was the video. Now before we move on to images, just having a quick look at what we're working with here. For the front facing cameras, the OnePlus 6 does have a high resolution as well as a wider aperture. For the rear facing cameras, we've got dual camera setups on both, but we've got very different configurations. The OnePlus 6 has a primary 16 megapixel camera with optical image stabilization and also a secondary 20 megapixel camera. Both cameras have an f1.7 aperture, and the secondary camera seems to only help with the bokeh mode. The iPhone 10 has a dual 12 megapixel camera setup. Both of these do have optical image stabilization, and the secondary camera is a telephoto camera, so this is going to give you 2x optical zoom. Now all images that you're going to be seeing have been taken on automatic, and I haven't tweaked any of the settings, and this is to keep things as fair as possible. And speaking of keeping things as fair as possible, the price is something that we do have to mention. The OnePlus 6 is less than half the price of the iPhone 10. So you can pick up two OnePlus 6s and still have money left over in comparison to the iPhone 10. And this is something that you definitely have to bear in mind throughout this comparison. Right, so kicking off with some selfies, you can see that the OnePlus 6 is slightly wider, but the dynamic range doesn't seem as good as the iPhone 10. If you look towards the background, some of the highlights have been blown out on the OnePlus 6, whereas these have been better maintained on the iPhone 10. However, the OnePlus 6 is sharper, and this is thanks to the high resolution. We can also crop in much further and get lots more detail on the OnePlus 6 compared to that of the iPhone 10. Now the iPhone 10 does have the selfie portrait mode, which is going to blur the background. This in general does a very bad job. As you can see here, it's blurred out all of my hair as well as the side of my sunglasses, and it's something that I find myself not using because it generally does a very bad job. However, it is available if you want to use it. This is currently not available on the OnePlus 6, but it will be available at a later date over a software update. Now I thought I'd try out a situation with tricky dynamic range, and here you can see that the OnePlus 6 is struggling to keep those details in the background, whereas those have been better maintained overall on the iPhone 10. So for dynamic range from the front facing camera, the iPhone 10 does seem to be doing a better job for images. Now moving on to low light images, here the OnePlus 6 is doing so much better compared to the iPhone 10. The iPhone 10 image is barely usable, whereas the OnePlus 6 is actually pretty good. And if we use the front facing flash, once again the OnePlus 6 is winning out here. You've got a brighter image with less noise. On the iPhone 10, things are very noisy. And the colors are also very bad. It's got this sort of greenish yellow tint, which is very unnatural. So for low light selfies, the OnePlus 6 is definitely doing better. Now let's move outdoors. So we're outdoors in good lighting and a macro shot. Both are doing really good here. Lots of detail, and if you do go in 100%, you can crop in further on the OnePlus 6, and that is because you have a slightly higher resolution. But generally speaking, both of these are doing a good job overall. Now moving on to an outdoor wide shot, once again, both are doing great overall. Lots of detail and color. And one of the advantages that you have on the iPhone 10 is 2x optical zoom. You have digital zoom on the OnePlus 6. Now looking at it initially, both of these actually seem to be doing a really good job overall. But if we do go in 200%, you can see that we've got a sharper image on the iPhone 10, and that is thanks to the optical zoom compared to the digital zoom of the OnePlus 6. Now moving on to a situation with very tricky dynamic range, we've got the sun here in the background, and here I do think that the iPhone 10 is doing a better job overall. The OnePlus 6 has favored the foreground, but in doing so has completely blown out the sun, whereas the iPhone 10 has better balanced that dynamic range. The sun isn't as blown out, but the details in the shadows have still been maintained in the foreground. Now let's move on to the portrait mode. And the first thing you will notice is that on the OnePlus 6, you do have a wider angle of view. And that is because on the iPhone 10, it does use the telephoto camera for the portrait mode. But in terms of edge detection, both doing very, very well. Now, to match these images as close as possible, I did get my brother who was taking this shot to move closer on the OnePlus 6. And here, once again, you can see that we've got great edge detection on both of these. Slight differences in color, but generally speaking, both are doing a great job overall. Another portrait mode shot, and once again, both are doing an absolutely great job in terms of edge detection. Now, we do have the different angle of view, so I'd say that the iPhone 10 angle is a little bit more flattering, whereas the wide angle, when you do get close, things do start to get a little distorted towards the side. But overall, both are doing a great job, and I would call this a bit of a draw. Now let's move on to low light. So we've got low light shot here, and both seem to be doing pretty good overall. But if you do go in 200%, you can see that the OnePlus 6 is sharper. The colors also seem better maintained on the OnePlus 6 compared to the iPhone 10. And trying a different shot outdoors in low light, I do think once again the OnePlus 6 is better maintaining those colors. But if you do go in 200%, this time the iPhone 10 is sharper compared to the OnePlus 6. Now final shot indoors in low light, here I do think the OnePlus 6 is doing better. Going in 200%, you can see that we've got a brighter image with less noise. So I would give the win here to the OnePlus 6. So there we have it, guys. That is the SuperSaf style camera comparison between the OnePlus 6 and the iPhone 10. Some very interesting results for the front-facing camera when it came to images. You do have more resolution on the OnePlus 6, which means you're going to be getting more detail, but the iPhone 10 does have better dynamic range. But in low light, the OnePlus 6 is better overall. You've got brighter images, and especially with the flash, you had a much better selfie. And when it comes to the front-facing camera video, the OnePlus 6 did seem to have better dynamic range overall, and it was a lot more stable. Now it does crop in quite a bit to achieve the stabilization, but if you're somebody who does vlog a lot, this is something that you might be able to get over, and I did prefer the stabilization of the OnePlus 6. Now for outdoor images, you do have more resolution on the OnePlus 6, but dynamic range was better on the iPhone 10, and you also do have the optical zoom, so you're going to be able to get in much closer to your subject on the iPhone 10. For video quality wise, both were actually really good, but the OnePlus 6 once again was more stable. It does crop in to achieve that stabilization, and this is something that you may have noticed, that the angle of view was not as wide as on the iPhone 10. But personally, I'm absolutely fine with that to achieve that smooth stabilization. For autofocus, I'd call it a bit of a draw. The OnePlus 6 did struggle in my previous tests, but this may have just been a one-off, and it did seem to perform pretty well overall here. And for slow motion, I would have to give the win to the OnePlus 6, because although you do have 1080p at 240 frames a second on both, on the OnePlus 6 you also have 720p at 480 frames a second, so it definitely gets the advantage here. For the portrait mode, I'd have to call it a draw. Both did great in terms of edge detection. You do have that different angle of view, which is going to come down to your personal preference. And for low light, we actually had some interesting results. I did prefer the OnePlus 6 overall. Generally speaking, it did have less noise and the colors were better maintained. For audio, we do have stereo recording on the OnePlus 6 compared to mono audio recording on the iPhone 10. But to me, the OnePlus 6 did sound quite tinny compared to the iPhone 10, which I did prefer overall. That's what I think anyway. What do you guys think? Definitely drop me a comment below and let me know your thoughts. One thing I do have to mention once again is the price of the OnePlus 6. It's amazing how it held its own and actually won in lots of categories compared to a phone which is more than double its price. Now, if you want to see lots of images from lots of different devices, then definitely give me a follow on Instagram. I'm at SuperSaf. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, then do hit that thumbs up button for me. And if you haven't already, then be sure to subscribe and switch on notifications. There's lots more content coming up on here. Thanks for watching. This is Saf on SuperSaf TV, and I'll see you next time.